Mr. Quirk, if you have a question or a comment, you may now begin.
Yes, so I have a comment, and you can respond in your close. First of all, let me move the bill. I'm sure you'll get a very good vote out of this, and it'll get out of committee and go on the ballot, and I would hope the people of California then approve it. But my problem is that it may not, just changing this depends upon the court's interpretation of what it means that we don't have involuntary servitude in prisons. It could be that nothing changes, or it could be everything changes. It all depends upon the courts. What we really need to do, and this is true whether this amendment passes or not, is as a legislature, and I would hope you would lead this effort, to come up with new rules for the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. Should we be paying minimum wage or some fraction thereof? That would probably cost about $2 billion a year, which then would come out of other programs. But maybe that's an investment we want to make, particularly if we could keep that money in trust until a certain amount of it in trust until people got out. We could have a much lower recidivism rate. So I can see the real advantages of that. But regardless of what it is we decide, we should decide, and that's true whether this passes or not. So in your close, I'm hoping that you will pledge to bring forward a bill to discuss what the parameters should be so that we know that we will get real change. Thank you.
You want to do it in your close? Yes, Ms. Wicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank the author for bringing about this bill and your leadership, not only on this issue, but across the board on criminal justice reform issues, and would love to be added as a co-author.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing Mr. Lee.
I want to thank the senator for bringing this important constitutional amendment. It's a real stain on California's legacy that it still exists here. I think, obviously, and this is only just a comment, but the qualified exemption of slavery that still persists after the Civil War, in the case except for punishment, is obviously a glaring error in that. And obviously one has fueled the mass incarceration that exists in this country. And I'm really glad that we're taking the affirmative step towards erasing the evolution of slavery that exists in this country. We know this exists through wage exploitation, through making our prison inmates conduct actual vital services and production that still exists across this country. So hopefully, as our colleague from the East Bay alluded to, hopefully we'll be taking the lead on that. I would love to join you in that effort to make sure that real human dignity and real human labor is actually valued in this. Even in the context of prisons, they're still human beings and they should be treated as such. We didn't sentence them to do free labor in any other context that is slavery, of course. So really hopefully that we will be working on this measure, and I'm happy to support it today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? You may close, Ms. Kamlager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to thank you for agendizing this item so that we could have this discussion, and I thank my colleagues for your comments. I want to address the questions and comments raised by Assemblymember Quirk. In fact, there is case law on the books dating back to 1883 on the unconstitutionality of slavery. And in fact, in 1911, Bailey v. Alabama, they actually questioned it with regards to involuntary servitude. This is about taking this issue out of this body and to the voters in 2022 by putting it on a ballot. It could be challenged in the courts. It could go to the state Supreme Court. It could go to the Ninth Circuit. I believe they're standing because there are other states who have also passed this and are beginning the conversations around dignified and appropriate wages and pay. Ultimately, there are two issues: what our state constitution says, and then what our penal code section says and other laws on the books that we have, as well as other jurisdictions throughout the state, around what is an appropriate wage. And I hope that A, this passes, and that B, we can continue the conversation about what is an appropriate wage for someone who is incarcerated. And that people will get uncomfortable because it will ultimately force folks to decide the value of a body while they are incarcerated, the value of a person while they are incarcerated. And I don't know where that will lead us, but it surely should lead us to someplace other than 8 cents an hour. You know, the penal code says that CDCR shall require of every able-bodied prisoner imprisoned in any state prison as many hours of faithful labor in each day and every day during his or her term of imprisonment as shall be prescribed by the rules and regulations of the Director of Corrections. When I read that, I thought to myself, this is very similar to what I would hear in a story about a slave owner and a plantation. And how do we re-engineer what criminal justice looks like, what our criminal legal system should look like, and how we treat people? These are real vestiges of slavery that we are dealing with, that you all deal with every single time a bill comes before you in many instances. Mr. Lockhart, while he didn't say, had to actually get permission from his parole officer to come here today to testify. If that isn't having a silent, invisible shackle on you, I don't know what is. So I am hoping that you will vote on this bill, that we will be allowed to bring it to the floors, and ultimately that we will be allowed to bring this to the voters in 2022. You know, words matter. Words matter because they prescribe our values. And I have to believe that in this year of this century, we are working to rethink some of the remnants of times that were not good to certain people and to fix those. So, in the words of one of the callers, Mr. Chair and committee, let's do this. Let's pass ACA3. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
And I want to thank the author for bringing this forward, especially so close to Juneteenth. And when you really think of Juneteenth, like a lot of celebrations or a lot of days that we honor what has happened in the past, if you really think about Juneteenth, it's about delaying justice. In Texas, slaves in Texas weren't notified when slavery ended, and it was deliberate. It was deliberate because it was economically not in Texas's advantage to let people free labor out of Texas. Slavery was begun because of free labor. Indentured servitude back in England was all about companies being able to get the cheapest labor, even child labor, to be able to keep the economy going. The reason we were 3/5 a person, because you can't force an individual to work for less unless you downgrade them in that manner. And that's why we were able to get away with slavery, which built this country, built this on the backs of slaves that go all the way back 400 years ago. And so it's an economic thing. And for individuals that are incarcerated, just think of it. If we had paid this man what he was worth, and I know there was discussion about how much money that is, but if we had paid this man who was worth $1,000 a week that you would pay a firefighter, he would walk out of prison with $150,000 to start his life all over again that he actually earned by putting his life on the line. That's reparations. I'm on reparations. This should be part of it. We should look at all the laws that have kept African Americans, Latinos, and others behind so that we even the playing field so they can be equal to everyone else. And you were asking, where do we go next? As part of reparations, this should be part of it. As Mr. Quirk was saying, where do we go next? This whole concept of paying people, of removing all the vestiges of slavery and other things that kept people down, maybe that's where we start with the laws and even the naming of things. I'm also on a committee that looks at the naming of things in California that are racially insensitive, that have kept people back, because they're racist names, and it downgrades a whole society of people. We're going to look at that too, because that's also part of reparations. And so the reason that this bill is so important, not only it begins the conversation, but it helps me validate why we need to have this as part of reparations. And so I thank you, because you not only make my job easier as a member of the Reparations Committee, but I think you have set the stage for the dialogue that we need to move forward. So the chair is recommending, and I vote. Call the roll.
On ACA3, the motion is due pass to the Appropriations Committee. Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, aye. Lackey. Lackey, aye. Bauer Cahan. Bauer Cahan, aye. Lee. Lee, aye. Quirk.
Aye.
Quirk, aye. Santiago. Santiago, aye. Sayarto. Wicks. Wicks, aye.
That measure passes. Thank you.
Thank you.